Ines Bulic, yes, we hear you.
I'm here. Hi, thank you,
Yeah.
Etienne. I will also share my presentation, share screen.
So while you do it, I'm going to tell you a bit about yourself. So Ines Bulic is director at the European Network for Independent Living. So ENIL is a Europe-wide network of disabled people, independent living organization, and their non-disabled allies on issues of independent living. ENIL represents the disability movement for human rights and social inclusion based on solidarity, peer support, désinstitutionnalisation, democracy, self-representation, cross-disability, and self-determination. Ines Bulic will be presenting about the independent living policies in the European Union. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Etienne, and hello, everyone. I will start by apologizing because actually it was our colleague Camille Gongor who was supposed to deliver this presentation, but unfortunately he fell ill last week. So he's at the hospital in the hospital at the moment. So we all wish him well. And so I jumped in to replace him. So I'll do my best with this presentation. I also wanted to thank Cha for doing this conference. It's been very interesting. I have been listening today, and it has been a pleasure to support it as ENIL. So let me start. So this is just a little bit, Etienne has now introduced ENIL for you, the European Network on Independent Living. This is just a little photo from our Freedom Drive, last Freedom Drive, which was last year. And it shows a lot of people holding sort of fake tombstones, which say RIP, rest in peace, 27th September 2022, which is the date of the Freedom Drive. And it's a lot of people, wheelchair users, not wheelchair users, lots of disabled people and allies. And these tombstones, we wanted to, this is in Brussels, the Freedom Drive is in Brussels. And we wanted to bring a message to the European Union about how many people have died especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also how many people are still dying or barely surviving, barely living in institutions across the European Union. And it's been great having some colleagues here today. So you heard from Nicola, who is from our ENIL Youth Board. So we have a youth section as well, which is very active. And also from Theodor Mladenov, who is coordinating our Independent Living Research Network. So this is just a little bit about ENIL. We have, of course, a website at enil.eu with a lot of information. And we are doing our best to have more information available in French as well. But thankfully, also, there are a lot of automatic translation programs nowadays. So I hope that some of our information is accessible also to French language speakers. So the topic is the independent living in EU policies. And I have divided the presentation into, I will start by saying a little bit about the period pre-CRPD, which means before the European Union ratified the CRPD in 2011. And of course, the European Union is the only regional organization in the world which has ratified the convention. In general, it is the countries. I mean, it is only the countries, the states that ratify the convention. So the EU is quite an exception here. But before that, I mean, there isn't too much to say on that period. We had in terms of independent living, and this is really interpreting independent living in the broader sense, we had this employment equality directive and employment equality directive, which basically directive means it is hard law, so to say. So member states should transpose it into national legislation, and basically it protects discrimination in employment on various grounds. It protects against discrimination in employment on various grounds, including on the ground of disability. Among other, this directive defines what discrimination means, what indirect discrimination means, and what reasonable accommodation means. And of course, it is limited to the area of employment and work. I'm not going to go into the details of how actually it is being implemented in practice, but in theory, you know, it is a directive, so it should be implemented. There is also this Commission regulation on state aid, which is interesting because, well, its main purpose was basically to forbid member states of the European Union of supporting, you know, companies, of giving state aid to companies, because of course that has an effect on competitiveness, and the EU is of course all about the single market and the economy. So this regulation made some exceptions when it comes to the recruitment of disabled workers. So it gave the national governments permission to finance 60% of a disabled person's costs for a period of up to 1 year, and it also allows them to financially support adaptation of premises and what they call special assistance, which should be personal assistance. It's not called that way; it's called special assistance. So there are some exceptions to state aid rules for hiring of disabled people. Then in 2008, we had, you might have heard about this, there was a proposal by the European Commission of an equal treatment directive, which would extend protection from discrimination to the other areas of life, so not just work. And it included the ground of disability. And of course, this would have been very good news for disabled people, because it would have allowed access to all the mainstream services such as health, education, transport, leisure, etc. Unfortunately, this directive has been blocked in the European Council ever since. So some of the member states were against adopting this directive, so it still remains just a proposal, which means, you know, we don't really have this directive. And there has been a lot of work on behalf of DPOs at the European level, you know, campaigning for this directive to be unblocked, and the European Commission always puts in its plans that they plan to unblock this directive, but it is still blocked. Then before the CRPD was ratified, we also had the first European disability strategy, which was from 2010 to 2020. And already that first disability strategy mentioned transition from institutional to community-based care and personal assistance as objectives of the European Commission. So something that they want to support within the EU. So this is the pre-CRPD period. I will say a little bit about, you know, effectiveness of all this. Then the CRPD entered into force at the EU level on the 22nd of January 2011. But the CRPD doesn't apply to all the areas of EU level, because the European Union has limited competencies in relation to the member states. So For example, it can interfere when it comes to employment, but it cannot interfere when it comes to other areas such as personal assistance, for example. So the EU ratification document is accompanied by a so-called declaration of competencies, where the European Commission has outlined all the laws to which all the regulations at EU level to which the CRPD applies. But there is a sort of a policy framework for implementation of the CRPD at EU level. So this is not hard law. These are just policies which are meant to guide the work of the European Commission and ideally have an effect on what is happening in the member states. But these are just policies. They're not. I mean, they cannot really be implemented if the member states don't want to implement them. So it really depends on the member state. So we have this European Pillar of Social Rights since some years now. And this pillar has two important principles for us. That is one principle is related to the inclusion of persons with disabilities, but it is limited to just employment. So it's inclusion of persons with disabilities in the labor market. It doesn't say anything about any other area of life. And then it has another principle called long-term care. And here it talks about access to community-based services. Now, we don't really like that at ENIL, that access to services such as personal assistance is under this long-term care agenda, which mainly actually relates to older people, not so much to disabled people at EU level, but this is what it is. And we have a new disability strategy, which was drafted and adopted just fairly recently. So it runs from 2021 to 2030. I will say a little bit more about it in a minute, but basically the strategy, as the Commission says, is all based on, is all framed around the implementation of the CRPD. And maybe just to say, it doesn't just relate to what the European Union institutions aim to do within the EU, but also has a section on global action. So the EU also plays quite a big part in countries outside of the EU, especially in those countries which are hoping to join the EU and where it then can promote a certain agenda. In terms of the hard law, basically directives of something which should be again transposed, we have this European Accessibility Act from 2019, which basically aims to improve the internal market for accessible goods and services. So it doesn't really aim to make Europe accessible for all. It aims to improve internal market for certain things, which can be helpful, but does not go really far enough to solve a lot of the issues that disabled people are facing in terms of, accessibility. And I wanted to mention also, and this is something we work a lot on as ENIL, there are also a huge number of rules and regulations around EU funding. Now, for example, there is the cohesion policy and the structural funds, but also there are other funding mechanisms, such as more recently the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which aims to help countries deal with the effects of COVID, and there are all sorts of funds at EU level. But this specific regulation on the structural funds regulation has an explicit reference to the CRPD, and at least on paper it says that all member states, if they want to use EU funding in the area of of disability or anything that affects disabled people, should have strategies in place that are compliant with the CRPD. Of course, this doesn't work in practice, but it is there. In terms of the new disability strategy, so I guess under the criticism, based on the criticism that the last strategy perhaps was not actionable enough, did not include specific actions, this new strategy has some flagship initiatives, which are kind of the key things that the European Commission has committed to doing during the course of the strategy. And I have listed them here because they all in some way, of course, are linked to independent living, but one or two are particularly important for us. So first of all, the European Commission has actually just launched this accessible EU, can't remember what it's called, resource center, something like that, which basically aims to provide the knowledge base when it comes, and good practices when it comes to accessibility. They were meant to launch it last year, but they just launched it actually these weeks. Then the European Commission plans to extend the European Disability Card, which was piloted in a number of countries in the past years. But now they want to extend it throughout the whole of the EU. And just this year, there was quite a big consultation around this disability card. And according to the Commission, it should make it easier for disabled people to access support when they travel or move to another EU country. At ENIL, we have criticized in the past this European disability card because it didn't really allow people to move to another EU country or to access support. What it allowed people is maybe to access a museum, or to get a discounted ticket for theater, or perhaps to get a discounted rail ticket or something like that when traveling across the EU, which are all helpful things. But for somebody moving from one EU country to another, and for example, wanting to get personal assistance, this European disability card was not very helpful, at least in this pilot stage. So we have been sending a lot of comments now to say, okay, if you want to make this European disability card helpful, you have to make its scope much larger, so that people, for example, don't have to get a new disability assessment if they move from Bulgaria to Belgium, because their disability is not changing by crossing the country. But in practice now, people are not considered disabled once they move. They have to go through a whole assessment again, etc., etc. So this is another initiative. Now, the third initiative, which is really important for us, is that the Commission plans to publish guidance recommending improvements on independent living and inclusion in the community, with a focus on housing and support at home. And we are expecting this guidance by the end of this year. And we are, of course, as ENIL, taking part in a lot of consultations and have published our own proposal, which I will mention at the end. One thing to say is we don't know, of course, still if this guidance will be good. And the other thing, we don't know how seriously the member states are going to take this guidance. Because again, this is not going to be legislation, hard law. This is just going to be a policy document, which the Commission will, give the member states and tell them, this is what we believe you should be doing. But ultimately, it will be up to the member states if they comply or not. The Commission is also planning to publish a framework for social services of excellence, which is again going to be guidance in relation to what are quality services, how to measure the quality of services, what kind of quality assessment systems member states should have in place. So, and this will be published by the end of next year, according to the Commission's plans. And the last flagship initiative was the package to improve labor market outcomes of disabled people, which was already published last year. So this is again focused on access to employment. Sorry about that. In addition to that, the Commission launched this new disability platform, which basically brings together member states a couple of times a year. I would say 2 to 3 times a year, and then they exchange what they're doing in the area of disability rights, and they discuss joint initiatives such as this new guidance on independent living. And in addition to member states, NGOs are also invited. So ENIL is also part of this disability platform, and we can provide our input. I have to say the member states are usually very quiet in these meetings, and the meetings that I was in, I haven't heard the French representative speak. And finally, the Commission is also planning to improve its own human resources strategy within the Commission, so how they employ disabled people, etc. I just wanted to mention that there is one thing that is helpful at EU level when it comes to independent living. There is quite a bit of research available. So there is this European Disability Expertise Network, which used to be called ANED, and which has published reports on independent living before, and actually will publish a new series of reports on independent living in all the member states. I don't know if these reports will come out this or the next year, but it is quite a useful source of information on what is going on in different countries. And there is also the European Social Policy Network. So, for example, again, they have published a series of reports on social protection for disabled people in Europe. Again, if you would like to see how things are working in other countries and compare with yours, it is quite helpful. Now, I just wanted to highlight some main problems at EU level from our perspective. And also from the CRPD committee's perspective. The European Union was first reviewed by the CRPD committee in 2014, or 2015, sorry. And it just this April, it submitted its second official report. And the next review is scheduled only, unfortunately, for 2025. So ENIL has submitted shadow reports on Article 19, both then and also last year, and we will submit a couple more shadow reports. Also, interestingly, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disability has done a monitoring visit of the European Union, and he has published a report on the EU just in March this year. So I can send you also the links to this report. It's very interesting. And some of the main problems that he highlights is the fact that there is no prohibition of investing in institutions at EU level. So the European Commission, so the European Union, of course, gives a lot of money to member states, but it doesn't think that giving money to member states for building new institutions or renovating institutions is bad. In fact, it interprets it as part of progressive realization. So it says that member states cannot be expected to close down institutions so quickly. So it is okay if they spend some money on building institutions. There are also interestingly some projects on personal assistance in the member states. So the member states can, if they want to, use European money also to support community-based services. But our problem is that so much money still is going into institutions. We also had a big campaign, or not a kind of a short but intense campaign on the European care strategy, where the European Commission has also pushed disabled people together with older people, and where it's A, it claims that disabled people need care rather than support, and B, it leaves room again for the building of residential care facilities. So this is a little bit indicative of the EU's approach and the lack of understanding for independent living. And this is my final slide. Etienne, please come in if you would, if I should finish. But this is just to say, to tell you a little bit about ENIL's proposal for this new guidance on independent living. And it's available at the moment in English, but we will make an effort to make it available also for you in French. So we are here asking, first of all, the European Commission to have clear definitions in this guidance that are basically the definitions from the General Comment 5, also from the guidelines of deinstitutionalization, because there is a lot of use of the same terms like independent living, personal assistance, but everybody understands them differently. So a lot of member states are claiming to have personal assistance, but in fact, they don't have it. They have some kind of, home care service. So we are insisting on that. Then, of course, we are saying what personal assistance should look like. We have also put quite a lot of emphasis on housing, because that is one of the key problems at EU level, is that most member states have very little housing in terms of social housing, or just cheaper, accessible housing that disabled people and people in general who don't have much money to rent or buy from the open labor market can use. So we are asking for member states to come up with housing strategies and to really tackle this issue of housing, which of course is particularly problematic for people who live in institutions and who have nowhere to move to. Then we are talking about also what other community-based services should be in place to make sure that personal assistance is not the only service that is available. We are talking about also barriers to employment, but also access to healthcare. And finally, we are discussing some horizontal issues. And the main one is really the need for a paradigm shift at EU level, where really there would be an understanding that, all disabled people can and should live independently, have the right to live independently, that large institutions should not be replaced with smaller institutions, that everybody should have access to the support they need to live in whichever way they want. And that disabled people need support, not care. This is still missing at EU level, including from the EU policies that we have at the moment. So I think I end here, yes. And yeah, I put some links here, but happy to put them in the chat as well, if you would like to read a little bit more.
Yes, thank you. There's a current discussion in chat, and maybe you can react to it on the difference between personal assistance services and home care services, and whether home care services with like a medical support and with a high dimension of medical support help for independent living. So can you explain the view of ENIL on this?
Well, I don't know if the person asking the question has listened to Theodor's presentation, but we have a whole document explaining the difference between personal assistance and home care. The main difference is that, of course, the personal assistance is under the control of the person, the disabled person who is using this support. So the personal assistance is the boss. And also personal assistance is one-on-one support. A personal assistance cannot support several people at the same time. And also personal assistance is not available in any kind of residential setting. So these are some of the differences. We have also, I can share in the chat, we have recently finished a Mythbuster on personal assistance, where this is also explained. So in Ines' view, a personal assistant can also help with some medical, so-called, medical needs of the person. If they're trained by the person to do so. And this is our experience from a lot of the colleagues who have personal assistants. So this is not the main difference with home care. I mean, the main difference is the control and also the ability to choose your assistant. Whereas home care, in general, by and large, I mean, there might be exceptions. Home care, home carers are generally sent by an agency, and the person doesn't get to choose and decide. But I can put in the link. Oh, here Theo put the document, which explains it much better than I just did. But there are various elements, and we are actually, as ENIL, we are saying personal assistance, of course, is a key tool for independent living, and we are advocating for that. So personal assistance absolutely must be available to all disabled people who need it. But we also say that a range of other services should be available, so that if somebody would like home care, they can have home care. But personal assistance should be there for those who choose to have this kind of support.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are out of time for your presentation. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
And